Hello, friends. I have a real easy song to teach you, and it only uses 2 chords. And you can make up a lot of songs with just 2 chords. This song uses the chords C and G. But first, let's hear the story behind the song. Come on down to Bay Road. You'll find Mother Nature and the way that she grows. Back to the land. That's what our show is about today. My name's Dan Brillman, and this is
Playing guitar, writing songs, and what's that story about? What's that song about? Playing guitar, writing songs, and
on this show, we have a guest who has a different approach to farming. Here's a short video to show you what I mean. Here at the base of Rattlesnake Hill in Massachusetts, Ed Burr looks around his front yard. A profusion of sights and sounds, bursting with life. A place where life is created, where it grows, is nurtured, and encouraged to be itself, to be nature. But there's more. These plants can be eaten and used as medicines for overall general good health. Hi, Ed. Thanks for being on our show today.
Thanks, Dan. It's great to be here.
No, it's really exciting to have you here. And we have a video that we're going to show our audience so that they can see a little bit more about you. Ed Burr has learned and is now teaching us that nature is something to be cherished, loved, and used for our mutual benefit.
The basic difference between Bay Road Botanical and more traditional type of farms is our focus on our methods of growing plants and the plants that we choose to grow. Instead of growing some of the more traditional food crops such as tomatoes and corn, we try to focus on local edible plants, local medicinal plants. This land has supported people for millions of years and should be able to continue to do so. And that's been our focus all along here. What we do is selectively choose which plants we want to grow among the wild plants, the native plants that are growing here. And we make sure that we grow them in a way where they're integrated, as this is how these plants grow. So for instance, I have grape and I have catbrier and blueberry bush all growing together. The 3 of them like to grow together. There's white pine right next to it as well, and the oaks behind me. All of these provide nutrients to one another and also food and nutrients to myself.
Now that's a pretty amazing front yard that you have there, Ed. I was really impressed with it, and I'm so excited that you're on our show because we really want to learn more about your approach to farming. How did you get interested in woodland plants and flowers?
I first got into flowers when I was 6 years old. I started my first garden growing carrots and sunflowers. The carrots didn't come up, but the sunflowers did, and I was hooked from there. I got into the medicinal plants when my grandmother got breast cancer when I was 17, and the medication that saved her was a medication called Taxol, which is made from a plant called the yew. The yew is a pretty common plant that grows around here. It's in front of most people's homes. It wasn't a plant that was from Africa or from Australia or the Amazon or someplace exotic. It was something that was from right out in the front yard.
So how did you learn all this stuff?
A lot of studying and a lot of research. I learned a lot from just being out in nature and watching what goes on out there as well. A lot of studying.
Well, when I first met you, it was on Rattlesnake Hill, and we're going to be talking about Rattlesnake Hill a little later in the program. But we have a clip that we're going to show about a plant that's edible. Let's take a look.
That's my water right there. That water that goes there, we can follow it all the way to my house. And you eat those just like a potato.
Ed Burr tells us why this place is so important to him, his family, and all those living downstream of this pristine, meandering water. Well, that's a pretty fantastic place to be living here in this pretty suburban area of Massachusetts. And you're eating something that was like a potato. Can you tell me a little bit about what that is?
Sure. That was a Jerusalem artichoke, or a sunchoke. It's a member of the sunflower family, and it's a tuber much like a potato, and you eat it and prepare it just like a potato.
And where does it grow?
All around. Again, being a member of the sunflower family, almost everywhere it can grow. I've seen it as far south as Texas and as far north as upper Michigan.
So where did you get the tubers to start off with?
I got them from a friend.
Yeah? So you were able to get them, other people could, mail order them, or?
You could definitely mail order them from a lot of the seed supply companies, or get them from a neighbor or a friend, yes.
And how do they taste?
They're fantastic. They taste just like potatoes.
You know, Ed, we just started a series called A Walk with Ed. You and I have been working on this series, and we've been taking a look at individual plants really closely. And we're going to take a look at an anemone right now.
Welcome to the woods of Southeast Massachusetts. My name is Ed Burr. I'm with Bay Road Botanical, where we specialize in native medicinal and edible plant species. Join me on a walk in the woods to see some of the best southeastern Massachusetts has to offer. It's Ed Burr with Bay Road Botanical. We're out back in the woods where we've come across some anemone. There are many anemones that grow out here. This particular one is called wood anemone. Let's take a closer look at anemones and some of their medicinal benefits. Anemone virginiana, or Canadian anemone, was used as an expectorant, an astringent, and a pneumatic. The root was used for whooping cough, tuberculosis, and diarrhea. The smoke of the seeds of the anemone were blown up the nose of an unconscious person to help wake them. While we've talked about a lot of benefits of anemone, if you do come across it in the wild, please only harvest it with your eyes. It is quite rare. Anemone is perennial and will reward you year after year with its beauty. I'm absolutely thrilled to be able to share this stuff with you, and more than lucky to wander these woods every day. But even with decades of experience, I still make mistakes. Just because I ate it doesn't mean you should. So please, be extra triple sure of what it is that you're doing before you try any of this at home. Until then, harvest only with your eyes. I'm Ed Burr with Bay Road Botanical.
Now, we just started the series and we have 3 of them done, and we have 4 more that we're going to be editing, and there's going to be more coming, so keep your eyes out for A Walk with Ed. And Ed, can you tell me a little bit about why it's so important to harvest with your eyes?
Well, a lot of the plants that we discuss only grow in habitats that are established habitats that have been around for a long time, and there aren't a lot of those left. And when they get cut down, they don't come right back. They take hundreds of years to come back before a plant like that anemone that we saw in the video comes around again. So if you do come across one and you're lucky enough to see one, you really want to leave that one there and allow that to multiply.
So if you destroy a habitat, you know, it would take hundreds of years for this kind of plant to come back?
Sure, some habitats, yes. So not like your lawn, where if you scratch across your lawn and you leave a dirt mark and you get dandelions and crabgrass. Those are called pioneer weeds. They come very quickly and they very quickly revitalize the soil. If we would allow that to continue to grow, eventually you would have a woods. That would take several hundred years to grow. Woods, just like your lawn, would go through stages along the way. To get to a woods that would support something like an anemone is about a 400-year process.
Yeah, so when you talk about endangered or rare plants, you're also talking about endangered and rare habitats.
Exactly. The habitats are almost, or maybe even more important than the plants themselves.
In our next video, we're going to learn a little bit more about your philosophy on gardening. We're going to take a look at that clip right now.
Ancient soil has nurtured a diversity of plants and animals, improving upon itself since the last ice age. One big reason? This land was never farmed.
Because it was not farmable, all of those networks under the soil that are crucial to plant growth and animal growth and everything were never disturbed, and allowed them to be developed and to mature over time. That's called tannin. All plants produce that, some of them more than others.
By reading, study, and research, Ed Burr has become a plant expert. Bay Road Botanicals has become a passion more than a business. He raises, nurtures, and teaches about threatened and endangered medicinal herbs and plants.
You learn from nature by walking in nature every day.
Ed sees his backyard as a whole, working together to create a story.
These aren't just a bunch of words in rows. There's a story. They're put together and they make sense. And removing a piece of it or removing a paragraph ruins the story.
This delicate balance, created by centuries of growing connections, the natural beauty, this perfect harmony, nature's infrastructure, engineered to perfection by a force we can only wonder about. What will we lose? What is the cost? What happens to the words of this story if we disconnect them?
As you disconnect it, then it becomes less healthy and less viable, and eventually it doesn't exist anymore.
Well, you know, Ed was talking to me about ancient soils, and I really was impressed with the idea. I mean, I started to think about that, and how often do you find ancient soil?
Yeah, you know, it's really only recently that we've realized how connected everything actually is under the soil. What we're calling a mycelial network, because we can't determine where the mushroom ends and where the plant itself begins. So we've come up with this new term of mycelial network or mycorrhizal network that allows us to just say this area in between, this gray area that's not quite mushroom and not quite plant. And what we found is they're communicating back and forth to one another. Different plant species are trading nutrients and minerals as well as information back and forth. And so when you get to ancient soils, those are soils where that soil hasn't been disturbed for sometimes thousands of years.
And you were talking about ancient soils because your backyard, Rattlesnake Hill, is one of those areas that hasn't been farmed and the soil is ancient. And one of the things you talked about in that video, which our producer Marilyn wanted to know about, was what is tannin?
Tannin is a chemical that most plants produce, and it's what gives the bitter taste in an acorn. Tannin was used traditionally to tan hides. That's where we get the term to tan a hide, because it dries it out. It's an astringent. That's where that bitter taste comes from, in a glass of wine as well. And
I actually witnessed you eating an acorn. You showed me that acorns can actually be eaten.
Yes.
I've never tasted one, but you know, one of the things I was really impressed with was your analogy about the story. You know, if you think of nature as a story and you take a paragraph away from it, which might be development, or you build something somewhere and that's a sentence in the story, or even a word, a small area that's destroyed, you know, the story is ruined. So, I mean, tell me a little bit more about that.
If you plant plants next to one another that get along, they complement one another and will trade nutrients and information with one another. If you try to grow them by themselves in rows, they generally don't do as well and require a lot more assistance.
So you're just describing traditional farming now?
Correct.
Everything in rows, all the same plants, and
sure,
a huge area,
sure,
corn or whatever.
Somehow we call traditional farming alternative farming, and alternative farming is traditional, but yes.
Yeah. And so what do you call your farming?
Tending. The difference between what I do and farming is that I don't accept that I'm separate from nature. I'm a part of that whole story. I am one of the words in that story. And by not allowing myself to be separate from nature, I don't separate it when I'm out there. Whereas in a traditional farm, you are separate from nature and you are separating everything.
Now we have a couple more clips where we're going to show two different plants that we did in the series. And you talk a little bit about what they're good for. So we're going to take a look at, the first one is wild oats.
Hey, it's Ed Burr with Bay Road Botanical, and we're out back here where we've come across a patch of wild oats. Wild oats have been used traditionally both medicinally and edibly, and we're going to take a closer look at this plant. Another name for wild oats is bellwort. The flower hangs down from the bottom just like a bell does. It's also called Uvularia sessifolia, or it's Latin sessifolia, because it hangs down like the uvula in the back part of your throat. You can identify this plant from Solomon's seal or false Solomon's seal because it has this little break off to the left here before it shoots to the right and flowers. Solomon's seal and false Solomon's seal both come out as a single stem all the way down. A tea of the leaves was used as a blood purifier and to treat diarrhea. The roots were poulticed to treat broken bones. Finally, bellwort is an edible. Treated just like asparagus, you can roast it in the oven or eat it raw right out in the field.
Wow, you know, you just said that that's edible. It looks pretty small to me. Is that a stalk that you eat?
That is
on
the
plant?
stalk. Just like in asparagus, you eat the beginning part of that plant. And most greens, when you eat a green, you eat the earlier growth on it. So yeah, you would need quite a few of those to make up a meal. It's a side dish.
Yeah, so would they be edible when they get bigger?
They are edible when they get bigger. They get a little bit tougher, much like most greens. So yeah, I would probably tend to stick to it when they were younger.
So is wild oats something that you would plant in a garden?
No, it is related to some ornamental plants that we do plant in a garden, but that wild oats is one of those plants that just kind of shows up and does its thing. It does come back every year in the same patches, and I've noticed them getting larger and larger, but I wouldn't attempt to, I've never attempted to try to plant it anywhere.
One of the techniques that you use is letting plants grow where they would normally grow with the other plants that nurture and grow with them.
It's a different design strategy than probably what most people are used to, but I do find that a lot of plants like to wander, and I allow them to. If they're more happy growing over there than where I initially planted them, I'm okay with that. That's why it's more tending and less farming.
Our next plant is the wild May apple, and I know that you are growing that. You had that growing in your front yard, I think, or side yard. So we're going to take a look at the video on that right now.
I'm here with Photophyllum peltatum, or mayapple, also known as American mandrake. We've planted this in the front garden last year, and it started spreading right away. This has been traditionally used both as an edible as well as medicinal plant, and I'm going to show you some of those features and some of the cautions you need to be careful of when you do use this plant. Traditionally, the leaves of mayapple were made into a tea to treat constipation as a strong purgative and a worm expectorant. If something makes you throw up and have diarrhea, it's probably poisonous, and this is. I don't recommend using it as a tea. The root resin was used to treat venereal warts and syphilis, and today a synthetic version of that resin called ectoposide is used to treat testicular cancer and small cell lung cancer. While I wouldn't recommend the tea, mayapple does produce a white flower underneath the leaves that grows into a yellow fruit, about the size of a ping pong ball. If you can beat the critters to it, that's a pretty tasty treat.
Now, up until I started working with Ed, I didn't even know that there was such a thing as a May apple. And Ed, you're kind of like an encyclopedia. I feel like you know so much about all these different things. You've done so much reading in this area, and no matter what I ask you about, you seem to know about that. Do you actually help people to learn these kind of things? Do you have presentations? Do you do walks? Do you give classes?
I do all of those things, and I'm very grateful for all of those who've come before me that have taught some of this stuff to me and written a lot of this down. To me, when I see this, this is the people's information. It's the people's garden out there. When I'm walking through the woods, it's not my land to walk through the woods. It's anyone's land to go ahead and walk through that woods and eat. So that information, to me, is information that you should just have handed down to you from generation to generation. When I walk into the grocery store and I pick up carrots, I know not to eat the tops. I learned that from my mom. I know when I pick up tomatoes that I also don't eat the tops, that I eat the fruit. So where did I learn to eat the root of this and the top of that, or the fruit of this? I learned that because it was passed down from generation to generation, and I believe this should continue to do the same way. To that end, I offer weed walks where I will either come to a location or people can come out to where I'm at just to learn medicinal and edible crops, as well as classes to teach people how to utilize these things.
And earlier you were talking about how you could walk into the woods, just a few feet into the woods, sit down and talk about what's around you for a half an hour or so.
Sure. One of the things that really surprised me when I first got started, and certainly surprises people when I let them onto it, is how much of this stuff is actually usable. People survived here for thousands and tens of thousands, millions of years, eating just the local stuff here. Nothing was shipped in or bought at a local store. And all of that stuff still grows here, and most of it is edible. And so yes, you can sit down in the woods and talk for half an hour.
We can't imagine doing that. We can't imagine living without a grocery store. Now, how do we start to reimagine a different kind of world?
I think this is a step. This is a step in that direction. Certainly growing your own food or working with local farmers that are growing food is definitely a step in that direction. I chose the native plants because they grow here. They're easy to grow. They're very easy to grow. Most of them people consider weeds. So it's not very difficult to plant the back 40 with dandelions. Just wave around, you know, a dandelion pod as opposed to corn, which is something that doesn't grow here, or a tomato that's not even from this continent.
You know, you've shown me so many things that people call weeds that aren't, that they're actually used for medicine, to cure cancer, to eat. I mean, we have so much knowledge that we've lost, and it seems like you're starting to help in a way to reconnect us back to that ancient knowledge.
That really is my goal. The world itself is a garden, and it's not our garden, it's a community garden, and it's not like a traditional community garden where we all get a plot, which is a good thing for us because we paved over our plot. So we're now using their plot. And we need to learn how to use that better. Again, that sustained us for a very long time. And only up until 150 years ago, most people were being sustained by the land that they were living on. So we're not that far away from where we were.
You know, and it's interesting that it's really hard to find any grass in your area. Around your yard, there is no grass. I mean, except for maybe some wild types of grass. But everywhere else, everybody's lawn is grass, and there's nothing really else growing except ornamentals. So is there a possibility, like we in our yard have tried to grow gardens and turned it back into kind of a wild place? Is there hope for the rest of us?
Certainly. I think perhaps a little change in mindset when you say we grew our garden, and think about what you tried to grow. You came in, and when you grew a garden, you were trying to grow one individual plant by itself, probably in a row. I'm not blasting you, but that's the way we were taught to do it. And that's not how they grow. So I'm a little lazier. I let them all grow together. I don't mind if they mingle with the local kids. It's okay. I actually invite the local kids to dinner a lot of times. They serve as the salad. But it's just a different mindset that people have to take on when they're out there gardening.
When I was in your front yard, I was like a kid in a candy store with my video camera going. I could spend weeks here videotaping all the stuff that's out here. It's amazing. Now, Ed, we only have one more video to show, and we're going to talk a little bit about preserving Rattlesnake Hill after we see this important video about Rattlesnake Hill.
What makes Rattlesnake Hill unique is the fact that it was not farmable. Because it was not farmable, all of those networks under the soil that are crucial to plant growth and animal growth and everything were never disturbed, and it allowed them to be developed and to mature over time. The reason why Rattlesnake Hill shouldn't be destroyed is because these networks don't exist anymore. And this story goes back a long way. And we have the opportunity to allow this story to continue to write itself the way that it should.
You know, I had a great time on that walk, and that was the day I met you, and you said, hey, I do some stuff, maybe we can team up and do some videos, and next thing I know, I'm learning so much about nature. Can you tell me a little bit about why you think preserving Rattlesnake Hill is so important?
Sure. Rattlesnake Hill is a unique piece of property, as I mentioned in the video, in that it was never farmed. The soil was never torn up. That mushroom layer, the mycelial network that's there, was not destroyed, and allowed those plants to continue to communicate with one another, and allowed the plants that are a little rare, like the anemones and some of the other stuff that grows up there, to be able to establish themselves and get the nutrients that they need to be able to grow. That's unique in this area, in this little area of New England, and it's unique everywhere, really, because the plants that grow here only grow here. And when we think about conservation, a lot of times we think about far-off lands or exotic places, and we really need to think about our local home places, as, again, these places have supported us for a long period of time, and once they're gone, they're gone. Rattlesnake Hill is an example of a place that once it's gone, it will be gone.
Hopefully Sharon will be able to save Rattlesnake Hill. I think it's so wonderful that you're doing this work, and all the people in Sharon have been fighting so hard to preserve Rattlesnake Hill, and I really hope that they're able to do it. It's been great having you on the show, and can you give people an idea of how they can get in touch with you?
Sure. Thank you, first of all, for having me on the show. It's been wonderful. I can be reached through my website at bayroadbotanical.com.
Yeah, and that's Bay Road Botanical, singular.
Correct.
Without an S on the end.
Correct.
Okay, Ed. Well, I want to thank you again for being our guest. It's been really a lot of fun, and that half hour really flew by.
We're down in the lower garden where we've come across the return of an old friend, pink lady slipper, or American valerian, also known as moccasin flower.
It was really great having Ed Burr on the show and to give us a tiny glimpse of what's all around us. And we look forward to seeing more segments of A Walk with Ed. Now, I'd like to thank the crew because they make this show a reality. Marilyn Brillman, Billy Davis, Gary Petty, Justin Shanahan, and Kathy Welch. And I'd like to shout out a special thank you to Chris Burgess. Now, Chris has been working with us for the last year, helping us on the show, but he has to go to New York and go to grad school. And Chris, I'm wishing you the best of luck out there in New York and do great in school. If you'd like to see more about the wild plants, you can go to Ed's website, Bay Road Botanical. Now let's get back to the land. Come on down to Bay Road. You'll find Mother Nature and the way that she grows. We'll take a walk in the woods, commune with the wild plants, and life will be good. We'll take a walk and understand we're going back to nature, back to the land. We're going back to nature, yeah. We're going back to the land, to the land, to the land. We're going back to Mother Nature, yeah. We're going back to the land, to the land. I don't know if you've been following Playing Guitar, Writing Songs, but we've had a lot of tremendous guests on our show. Environmental heroes and people who are caring for the earth. Ed Burr is just one example. What an amazing guy he is. And what I want to do now is teach you the song, Back to the Land. The C chord is played by pressing down the second string of the first fret. And then you press down the fourth string of the second fret with your middle finger. And with your ring finger, you press down the sixth string of the third fret. And with your baby finger, you press down the fifth string of the third fret. Now to play the G chord, use your index finger and press down the fifth string of the second fret. And then use your middle finger to press down the sixth string of the third fret. And then you use your ring finger to press down the second string of the third fret, and your baby finger to press down the first string. Music is a great way to communicate. And if you practice, you could tell a story that could possibly change the world. So keep on practicing, but above all, have fun. I'm Dan Brillman for e-awakening.com.